Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I want to talk about something that is probably one of my favorite parts of books, and that is the first sentence. I personally think first sentences are incredibly important because while a bad first sentence might not make you stop reading a book or put a book down, a good first sentence can definitely keep you going. First sentences just introduce you to a book. They're probably your first point of contact, if you will, aside from reading a summary or reading reviews. But they're definitely the first point where you actually get to delve into the story. They introduce you to the story, they introduce you to maybe the mood of the story. They can also kind of be misleading sometimes. They can introduce you to the characters. And I just love everything about them. And since I love first sentences so much, I wanted to share some of my favorites with you. It's no wonder that a lot of the books that I have here now are some of my all-time favorite books, because it's just a good first sentence just is an indication of how good a book will be most of the time. But anyway, let me just get started. These books are in no particular order. I just have them in a jumbled mess on my lap right now, and I'm gonna pick one after the other. But I do have a very iconic one to start you off, and that is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, which is kind of funny because I actually only gave The Hobbit 2 stars, I think. I did not enjoy the book overly much. I thought it just wasn't a lot that happened in the book, but I still love this first sentence because it's just so incredibly iconic. And the first sentence you probably know is, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." It perfectly leads you into the story. It kind of makes you curious what the story is about. What the fuck is a hobbit? I mean, we all know by now what a hobbit is. It's just simple and good, because flowery language can be beautiful and amazing, but it's definitely not always needed, so I had to put this at the beginning of my list. Next, I have Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier, and I know I said first sentences technically, but I count up to the first 3 or so sentences because sometimes it just all belongs together, and I love this one. 3 children lay on the rocks at the water's edge. A dark-haired little girl, 2 boys, slightly older. This image is caught forever in my memory, like some fragile creature preserved in amber. And again, it's just a first sentence or first 3 sentences that perfectly capture the mood of the whole story. It just gives you a slightly darker feeling, but it's just beautifully written, very atmospheric, but it just slightly gives you the feeling of coming doom. Then continuing on to a very simple first sentence again, and that is from Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book in the Reckoner series, and that sentence is, "I've seen Steelheart bleed." And this one isn't one where I'm like, oh my god, it sets the tone for the whole series so well, which it definitely does, but it makes you curious. You want to know more. You want to know, who is that Steelheart? Why is it important to have seen him bleed? And it just makes you want to continue reading. Next is one where I actually, once again, didn't enjoy the book so much, but I just think the first sentence encompasses the story so well, and the writing style so well, and the whole way the story is written, from the plot to the writing to the characters to pretty much anything in the story, and that is The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. And the first sentence is, "In a distant and second-hand set of dimensions, in an astral plane that was never meant to fly, the curling star mists waver and part." And it's just, to be honest, the whole sentence kind of makes you go, what the fuck is going on? I'm so confused. But it's just this whimsical thing that Terry Pratchett has about him, and so if you enjoy that, reading that first sentence will definitely make you want to continue, and it even made me want to continue even though I don't particularly enjoy that. Next we have a fantasy story again, and that is Eragon by Christopher Paolini. I just think fantasy books and fantasy series just have beautiful first sentences quite often, because you kind of want to set the mood for the whole story. And that first sentence here is, "Wind howled through the night, carrying a scent that would change the world." And I mean, it's an epic quest story fighting against the bad evil, so it just fits perfectly. This first sentence is just as epic as the series is, which I still have not finished, but we won't talk about that. Next, let's go with a classic, and that is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. And the first sentence is, "All children except one grow up." And of course we all know what Peter Pan is about, and so you can probably guess why I love this first sentence so much, because it's a first sentence that perfectly summarizes the whole book without giving too much away. Another first sentence that is quite similar is the first sentence of The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And this first sentence is, "The snow in the mountains was melting and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation." And you think that this first sentence might be very spoilery, because who is this bunny who has been killed, who actually is still alive at the beginning of the book? It tells you all you need to know to get into the story, and I would rather read the first sentence to someone and see if that makes them want to pick up the story than try to summarize what this really is about, because it's just so much easier to just use the first sentence. And it's so many less words. Then let's go back to epic fantasy with Wolfblade by Jennifer Fallon, which is the first book in the Hydron Chronicles. And the first sentence is, "It was always messy cleaning up after a murder." And it then continues, but I love the first sentence the most. But the continuation is, "There was more than just blood to be washed off the tiles. There were all those awkward loose ends to be taken care of, alibis to be established, traitors to be paid off, witnesses to be silenced." And that Eleazar knew was the problem. He just witnessed a murder. And it just, the first sentence alone is enough, but this is a highly political, high fantasy story, and so it just very much perfectly fits the mood because it's very dark. It's all about not having any allies. It's all about kind of, even though it's not the same series, it's all about knowing the Game of Thrones. And I have talked about this series a couple of times already, so if you want to get into Game of Thrones later on, this is a very good place to start because it's already very complicated. So I wouldn't recommend it to a fantasy beginner, but it's along the same lines, but not as complicated as Game of Thrones. Then I have Gretel and the Dark by Eliza Granville, and the first sentence is, "It is many years before the Pied Piper comes back for the other children. Though his music has been silent, still thousands are forced to follow him, young, old, large, small, everyone." And to be honest, this first sentence does not have a lot to do with the plot of the book, but it is kind of a fairy tale retelling-ish. Not really. Part of it is kind of a fairy tale retelling of Hansel and Gretel, so the first sentence actually doesn't even fit the right fairy tale. It just perfectly encompasses the mood of the novel. It's, by the way, historical fiction, kind of with a little bit of magical realism, and it's just grim and dark, just kind of showing the dark side of fairy tales. I don't know how else to describe it, but I absolutely love it and highly recommend this book. And lastly, we are at my 3 favorite first sentences. I had to leave those for last. They aren't in any particular order as well, but I love all 3 of them. First is Anne Bishop's Daughter of the Blood, which I don't have with me because I lent it out. And that is of course the first book in the Black Jewel series, which is my favorite series of all time. And the first sentence is, "I am Tirsa the Weaver, Tirsa the Liar, Tirsa the Fool." And it's so beautiful. I love this first sentence. I don't know why, I just think it's beautiful as a first sentence, but reading the whole series, it's not like especially fitting for the rest of the series. The prologue is also the only time a first-person perspective is used in the entire series, or like in any of Anne Bishop's books. So that's kind of weird, but it just made me wanna keep on reading when I first read it. It's just beautiful. And I know it by heart by now, so I don't even need the book with me. Partly because I have read it so often, and partly because it stays with you. Then next I have another one of my all-time favorite books, a very old friend of mine, to be honest. I read it probably around the same time as I read the Black Jewel series, maybe a little bit earlier. And you shouldn't generally do that because one of them is kind of middle grade bordering on YA, and the other one is definitely an adult book. But anyway, that book is Inkheart by Cornelia Funke, and I had to write the sentence down here because of course I have the book in German, and the sentence is, "Rain fell that night, a fine whispering rain." And it's such an atmospheric sentence that I absolutely love it, just as a sentence as a whole, but also in the way it leads into the book, because this whole book is very atmospheric. By the way, I won't ever do autumn recommendation videos because I don't generally read seasonally. You know what I mean? I don't really feel like some books fit some seasons better than others, but a lot of people love atmospheric books in autumn, and I would definitely recommend Inkheart if you haven't read it yet. And it's just atmospheric, it leads into it. It's kind of a bit spooky, but not too much, and I love that first sentence. And then lastly, my favorite first sentence, because just the way it's used in the book, not particularly because of the sentence itself, it's just because of the way it's used in a book, the way it's used in the second book, and it's just perfect. And that is from The Name of the Wind, the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. And the sentence is, "It was night again. The Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of 3 parts." This sentence firstly shows how beautifully written the whole series is. It's honestly one of the most beautifully written fantasy series I have ever read. And again, it just perfectly describes the mood of the book, the way it's written, maybe a little bit darker than the rest of the book actually is, but definitely showing how dark some parts can get. And to be honest, it might not be a sentence that makes you want to keep reading after you read it if you know nothing else about the series, but I just seriously love it. And that was it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below what your favorite first sentences are, and if any of the first sentences I just read to you made you maybe want to pick up any of the books. All the links to my social media, as always, are in the description box down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!